Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tools Studio, and today I'm going to show you how to make the elements for this enameled necklace. I love the way that the light flashes off of the mica that's been applied to the enamel here, and how the finished pieces look almost like pearls. This project was really simple and satisfying, and I can't wait to share it with you. We're going to be working this project in two stages, the clay working stage and the enameling stage. For the clay working stage, you're going to need a wick away with a brush, some cool slip, a work surface, some tough cards, a snake maker, an ultra clay pick, a split mandrel, a scalpel, a clay shaper, and a 2mm precision hole punch, a wander roller, a fine sanding pad, Cyprus Copper Clay, jewelry shape template organic shape number 7, bale template number 1, and some clay thickness rolling frames. I'm going to start off by preparing my work surface with some cool slip. And that's enough for both my work surface and my roller. And for these elements, I'm going to be rolling my clay to be 3 cards thickness. So I have my Cyprus Copper Clay, and I'm just going to roll it to be that thickness. I sometimes will rotate my work surface if I know I'm kind of going for a rectangular shape here. It's just easier to do that. And this will give me some clay to cut a good number of elements out of. Alright, so then I usually will lay down some tough cards for when I'm cutting. That way I'm protecting the surface that I roll my clay out on. And today I'm going to be working with this jewelry shape template, organic shapes number 7. I just think they look really nice for this process, but there's lots of other shapes that are kind of natural or organic that would make beautiful elements as well. So I'm working with the 3 largest size. I'm just dragging my clay pick. I'm not really going to fit anyone there. I'll do one of the smaller. And then the smallest. So for this necklace, I also have a toggle closure that I've made from the Cyprus Copper Clay. And for that, I'm not going to have room for the ring part of it, but I'll have enough clay for the clasp. And I'm going to be working with this largest bale shape. And these templates were designed for making bales, but they work really well for this as well. So I'm just cutting out that shape. And that's what's going to go through, so I'm going to roll myself some more clay to make the element that piece will slide into. For this ring, I'm going to be working with the 2nd largest and 4th largest circle. Actually, I'm going to scoot it up so I can make some more elements for the rest of the necklace as well. So I'm cutting out the outside of the shape, and then I'm going to line this up. And again, this is kind of an organic necklace. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfectly centered. And that's going to be my ring there. So since I've got some room for making some other units, I'm going to go ahead and cut out those shapes as well. And you basically just kind of repeat the process of cutting these shapes for these enameled elements until you have as many as you would like. You might want to make a necklace that sits close to the neck, and you won't need as many, or you might want to make a really long necklace. Or you might want to make a really long necklace. So those are design choices that you get to make. Now that I've cut out my shapes, I'm going to be using this 2mm precision hole punch to create holes to join the units together. And this 2mm punch will be perfect for 18 gauge wire once the elements have fired and shrunk. So for this ring element, I just need 1. And you don't want to put it too close to the edge because you run the risk of it kind of breaking through and cracking there. And then on all the other elements, you need 1 on either side. That way they can be joined together into a chain. And I always just use a pick in between every punch to clean things out. And you'll just keep doing this to all of your elements. And it's a really simple process, a little bit repetitive, but I'm really happy with the way that this chain looked, and I think it's totally worth it. We're not going to punch any holes in this element because we're going to end up adding a jump ring to that. So we're going to let this dry, and we're going to make the jump ring that we're going to attach to the back of this piece. To make the jump ring that's going to go on the back of my toggle piece, I'm going to be using a 6 cards clay thickness rolling frame to support my snake maker to make a coil. If you're really good at rolling coils and you don't need the thickness frame, then you can skip that part of it, but I just like it to make sure that I have an even and consistent coil. So I'm applying some gentle downward pressure while I'm moving my snake maker back and forth. And I kind of just do this until the snake stops growing. All right. So then I just have a split mandrel. If you see my videos before, you know that this is kind of my favorite little shape to wrap jump rings around. I just think it's a very nice size. But anything round that you have laying around that you think is a good size for your jump rings, you can use. So I just kind of wrap it around. And I kind of end up gently tapping the end here into its neighbor so it doesn't come undone. And then I'm also going to move this off to dry. So my elements have been dried, and some of them took a bit of a curl because I had them on heat and I didn't spend the time flipping them as they dried. But once they're fired, you can really easily just mallet them back flat. So I'm not going to worry about that. I have these jump rings that I made here, and it's a nice little coil. And I like to take the scalpel and just cut straight down through the coil to make them into individual rings. So now that I've got my rings, I kind of like the way that instead of just tacking on the whole ring there would look, I like to cut these in half again so there's just half a ring on the back there. All right. So I'll save these for another project. And then I'm going to scoot these off to the side for a moment. I'm going to make a little bit of a paste to attach that with. So I'm grabbing some more clay. Just going to add some water. And then I have this extra firm cup round clay shaper that I just kind of mash it with, really, to just kind of integrate the water and mix it until it's a kind of tacky, sticky consistency. So when you're happy with that, you're going to take your brush and you're going to dampen both of the elements that are to be joined. And I'm just going to kind of dampen the whole vicinity there. And then on my little jump ring, just the ends. And then I'm going to come back with that clay shaper and pick up some of the paste there and liberally apply it to these ends here. And that should be plenty. And then you can see how this guy's drinking up water. Add a little bit more. And then I like to kind of pick up my pieces when I'm adding jump rings. I find it's easier to be able to tell if it's looking centered when I'm holding them. And I'm just placing it. I'm not applying any pressure at this point. I'm going to bring it down, and that was pretty crooked, so I'm going to scoot it. And that looks a little more centered to me. I'm going to look at it from this side. I'm going to come this way a teeny bit. Just kind of scoot it around until you're happy with the placement. And once you are, at that point, I'm going to support my piece from the back here. You can do that with your thumb or by setting it down. And then I'm going to take my other finger and apply some pressure. I'm going to hold that in place for a moment. Once I'm feeling happy about the connection, I'm going to take my damp brush and kind of smooth out all this extra paste. I'm kind of working it around to really thicken up and strengthen that connection. At this point, if you didn't feel like you had enough paste, you could go and pick up some more from your tough card down there. But you want this to be a very strong connection because it is going to be kind of bearing the weight of your necklace. So I'm going to smooth that out, and then I'm going to set this off to dry while I talk about sanding and cleanup for the other elements. So while that's drying, I'm ready to spend some time with these elements. And if you've seen my other videos, you've probably noticed that I actually enjoy sanding. But for this project, it's not really necessary to spend much time on the surfaces. If there are any obvious gouges or nicks that are going to be visible through the enameled surface, you don't really have to worry too much about these faces. We're also going to be kind of filing away oxidization in between firings, so you don't really have to spend much time refining the surface. You're just going to be looking to refine the shape and remove any errors. So here there's a little bit of extra clay. I'm just going to knock that down really quick and then just kind of come along this top face, because there's a little bit of an edge for my clay pick. But for this project, since we are enameling these elements, you really don't have to spend much time sanding. I'm happy with that. Here I'm just going to knock those guys off really quickly. Kind of clean up that divot. And I'm just using the fine sanding pad. You don't have to go and work your way down through the grits to the finest, because again, we're going to be either covering these surfaces or hitting them with some sanding blocks in between enamel firings anyways. So you're going to do that to all of your elements, and then we're going to be preparing them for firing. Now that this toggle has dried, I'm just going to kind of give it the same treatment as my other elements. Make sure I'm happy with the shape and remove any blemishes to the edges. I am going to spend a little bit of time on this surface since I did kind of add material and there's some uneven areas. But again, you don't have to, go all the way up to the super fine or micro fine to get it really smooth, because we're going to be coating this with a generous layer of enamel. This is how I made the toggle closure and the elements for my necklace. It's a really simple and straightforward process. Depending upon how long you want your necklace to be, you may be making a few more elements or many more elements. For example, my necklace, which sits very close to my neck, has 2 of the largest, 3 of the second largest, and 11 of the third largest elements. I also always recommend making a couple of extras in case you make a mistake while you're enameling them. Before I load up my kiln, let's take a moment to talk about toggles in case you choose to make a shape different from the one I did, or if you're not familiar with how they function. There are 2 things to consider when making a toggle, and one part is the overall kind of height of your toggle. If you want to make more of a T-shaped toggle, you need to make sure that your barb element can fit through this way. So the idea of the toggle is that this bar is rotated to be vertical and then comes up through the loop and then is allowed to kind of fall and catch on this ring shape. So if your bar element has too much height this way, then it's not going to clear this inner circle of your disc there. Another thing to consider is the overall length of your bar. It needs to be longer than the distance of the longest part of your inside circle here, so that it can catch and kind of rest on top at every part. I usually like to have mine kind of actually longer than the whole overall shape here. I just think it looks nice when it kind of hangs over the edges some. But a general rule of thumb is that the overall length of this bar should be 1/3 again as long as the inside diameter of the longest part of this inner ring. When you've made all of your elements, you're ready to fire them. I fired my pieces following the instructions that came with my Cyprus Copper Clay. When your pieces come out of the kiln, they're going to have this matte finish to them, and I always like to just hit my pieces really quickly using this 120 grit radial bristle disc before I enamel them. So they kind of have this more shiny finish to them, but again, I'm not worried about really perfecting the surface because I'm just applying enamel to it. But I find that this 120 grit finish is a great surface for applying enamel to. Now that I have my copper pieces all ready to be enameled, let's take a look at what you need to enamel them with. I have some glycerin, some clear fire that I put in this blue spray bottle, and then some mica powders. Cool Tools sells lots of beautiful colors, but I decided to only work with the kind of cool colors. So I'm using this green, purple, this blue, and then this kind of champagne-y color as well. I'm also going to be using this pink sanding block, Thompson Unleaded 1055 white, and then any color that you would like for the counter enamel. I ended up selecting this blue. You're going to need a tile, a paintbrush, a mini palette knife, and an enamel sifter. You also need some way to fuse your enamel. You can either use a torch or a kiln. Today I'm working with a kiln that I set to 1450. When you're applying enamel to a piece, you always want to have enamel on both sides, your kind of main face and then the back, which is usually called counter enamel. Since the process of applying enamel is exactly the same for applying your counter enamel and the enamel to the front of your piece, I just went ahead and applied some counter enamel. After you have applied your counter enamel, and before you apply the enamel to the front face of your piece, you want to make sure that you clean up the oxidization from the side of your piece. If you don't, it could kind of pop off in the next firing and settle into your enamel, leaving a little black smudge. So you can use an old file. I have the sanding block laying around, and just really quickly run it along that side there to clean up that oxidization. And now we're ready to apply enamel to the front face. So now we're going to be enameling the front face. And again, if you haven't enameled before, you follow the exact same process for applying the counter enamel. My piece has been cleaned with some surfactant, and now I'm ready to spray on some clear fire. And I always kind of do that off to the side, because if I spray the clear fire on the paper that I'm sifting over, it's going to stick to the paper, and it's a little bit more difficult to recycle your enamel. So I have my 1055 white here, and that's just kind of a medium white. It has some nice opacity to it, but it's not a hard white. And it's just great for purposes like this. And I've got an 80 mesh sifter here, since I'm not really looking for detail. I'm just looking to apply a generous coat. And I just like to tap the wire here to apply the enamel. You can run your fingernail along, and that kind of will distribute enamel as well, but I just like to tap the wire. And you want to make sure you come out past your edges and get a nice even coat there. I like to be kind of generous with my enamel. You could do 2 thin coats, or you can try to do just 1 coat. It kind of takes some time to get the feel of how much enamel you need to get a nice solid opaque coat. But I think this looks really good, so I'm going to go fire in my kiln. Now that we've talked about enameling the discs, let's take a look at how to enamel these toggle elements. So I actually like to take a brush that has some clear fire on it and paint the clear fire on instead of spraying it on. I'm not trying to enamel the jump ring that's attached here, and if I were to spray the clear fire on, it would help the enamel adhere to that jump ring as well. So I've got my sifter loaded up with my counter enamel, since this is the back of my toggle. And I'm kind of angling this toggle piece here a little bit so I can get some enamel underneath the jump ring there. And just using my sifter to apply the enamel. And then I've got just a dry brush here that I'm going to come and knock off any excess here with. Alright, and this element's ready for the kiln. The counter enamel on this piece has been fused, and I'm ready to apply the enamel to the other face. But just like before, you want to make sure that you remove the oxidation before you apply the enamel. And I'm using that sanding block again to knock it off the edges. But you're also going to make sure that you remove it from this jump ring here, otherwise it's going to kind of fall into these parts of your counter enamel. So I'm knocking it off with that sanding block, and I'm going to use the corner of my sanding block here to get into the inside and the inner of that jump ring to clean that up as well. And again, that's just to keep your colors pure and to keep those little black specks from falling into your enamel and fusing into that surface. So I'm just going to flip this piece over and apply the white enamel to this face just like I did all the other pieces. After you've fused your white coat of enamel on, just like before, you're going to want to come along the side edge and remove the oxidization. Alright, so now we're ready to apply the mica. So for my necklace, I used all these kind of cool colors, but today I'm just going to be showing you how to apply with the blue. And I'm just going to scoop a little bit out with my handy mini palette knife here. And then I have glycerin here. And I'm using the glycerin to mix it in with the mica so that I can paint it on. The mica is very, very fine, and it's not really something that you would want to make airborne. Not only would you have a hard time kind of controlling the application of it, but it also would stay airborne for a long time. So whenever I'm working with mica, if possible, I like to combine it with a wet medium and paint it on. So you're looking for it to be kind of like an acrylic paint sort of consistency. And once it's all evenly mixed in, I just have a flat brush here that I'm going to pick it up with and just paint it directly on my piece. The only thing to really look out for this is you want to make sure you don't have streaks. Like if you were to push really hard and leave lines there, that will show. So you just kind of want to shoot for applying a really nice even coat here. And kind of before I showed what happens if you push hard, I'm really just kind of dragging the material across the piece here. I'm not applying any pressure. All right, so this is good to go and ready to be fired in. I usually will do a couple firings where I kind of open the kiln, place my piece into the kiln, and then kind of pull it out and go back and forth a little bit until it's dried. I'm going to go do that so you can see what it looks like when it's dry. So this is what it looks like when it's been dried. It's kind of lost that wet sheen that it had to it before. And I always encourage people to take the time to do this step because if you put this piece in the kiln when it's very wet, sometimes the glycerin can really quickly evaporate and kind of pull the mica away from the surface and do kind of strange things. So if you want a nice flat even coat, you're going to want to take the time to dry your piece. I'm ready to fire the mica in. When you're firing mica onto your piece, you're firing the enamel underneath the mica to receive the mica. So just like before, I have my kiln set to 1450. So once the mica has been fused into the enamel underneath it, I just like to use a damp paper towel to wipe off the excess. And you're kind of just left with this really nice kind of pearlescent sheen that kind of flashes when the light hits it correctly. So now I'm going to finish things up by using the sanding block to again remove the oxidization on the edge. And I actually kind of like the way that the darkened edge contrasts with this kind of pearly look, but leaving oxidization on a piece isn't a good idea. It just kind of constantly sheds and leaves these little black smudges everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it, and then I'm going to use liver of sulfur to darken that edge again. And that's just a better finish for the piece. I'm so happy with the soft and subtle nature of the colored mica powder on top of white enamel. I think the effect is really lovely, but if you're looking for something with a little more pop, these mica powders can be layered on top of colored enamel for a completely different look. And in the center there are some samples that I made of these micas over colored enamels while preparing for this project. These colored micas are so much fun to play around with. I've loved layering them and discovering my favorite enamel and mica combinations. I hope you give this technique a try and enjoy it as much as I do. Thanks for watching.